Honored guests, veterans, serving members, ladies and gentlemen, my name is Justice Bruce McDonald, and it is my great honor to be your Master of Ceremonies for this evening's inaugural Flame of Remembrance ceremony. At this time, could you please rise and join the students of Dr. J.K. Malloy School and Choir Director Lisa Armstrong in the singing of O Canada. Stand on guard for thee. Go, Flames, go. All right, please, everyone, please be seated. Well, those that have seats, I mean, that was under, goodness sakes. Anyway, on behalf of Valour Canada and the Calgary Tower, I would like to thank each of you for attending this evening's ceremony. We gather on the eve of Remembrance Day to light the tower's flame as a beacon to remind us of the significance of remembering. Tomorrow morning at 11 a.m., millions of Canadians will pause to remember the 115,000 Canadians who have made the ultimate sacrifice in the defense of our freedoms. Tonight, we pay tribute to the fallen, and especially the 516 Canadians who fell during the Korean War. Veterans Affairs has declared 2013 to be the year of the Korean War veteran. It is therefore fitting that a veteran of that war, Captain Hub Gray, will light the flame as a tribute to the 26,000 Canadians who fought in that war. For those of you who don't know, in 1951, Hub was a young lieutenant with the 2nd Battalion of the Princess Patricia's Canadian Light Infantry when they made their heroic stand against overwhelming odds at the Battle of Cap Yon. You will hear more of that about Hub and the PPCLI a little later in the evening. But right now, I would like to introduce to you some of the dignitaries that are here tonight. I would ask those whose name I call, if you just please stand up to be acknowledged, and if everyone could hold their applause till the whole list has been read out. So first of all, Joan Crockett, Member of Parliament for Calgary Centre. No. And you're next, sir. So the Deputy Premier of our great promise, Thomas Lukaszuk. Minister of Transportation, Rick McIver. Senator retired Dan Hayes. Mr. George Fixler, the Honorary Consul for the Republic of South Korea. George, where are you? Oh, yeah. Ms. Irene Bakker, Consul General for the Netherlands. Joey Blevis, CAO of the Calgary Poppy Fund. Murray McCann, founder of the Field of Crosses Foundation. Dr. David Berkeson, our keynote speaker. And tonight's guest of honor, Korean War veteran, Cap Yon hero, and ceremonial flame lighter, Captain Hub Gray. I would now like to call upon Major C.D. Lunny, of the PPCLI to bring a message from the former Governor-General of Canada and Colonel-in-Chief of the Princess Patricia's Canadian Light Infantry, Adrian Clarkson, and retired Lieutenant General Ray Crabb.
Good evening, everyone. Dignitaries, Hub. From Madam Clarkson and Lieutenant General retired Ray Crabb, they have special words for Hub tonight, so I'd like to read them if I could tonight. Firstly, congratulations and many thanks to Valour Canada and the Calgary Tower on your first annual ceremonial lighting of the Torch of Remembrance, and the wonderful tribute to deserving soldiers who have made a significant contribution to Canada's military. In this year of the Korean veteran and the 60th anniversary of the armistice, it is only fitting that the Korean War and the Battle of Kapyong be highlighted. And without doubt, there is no one who more epitomizes what this battle meant than the monumental Canadian you have honoring tonight, Mr. Hub Gray. All members of the Princess Patricia's Canadian Light Infantry are absolutely thrilled that Hub will be so honored this evening. Hub, on behalf of Patricias everywhere, please accept our most sincere and heartfelt congratulations for having been so honored. You are truly an outstanding representative of what Canadians respect and admire in our soldiers. We know that you will be reflecting back into late April of 1951 when, as the 2nd Battalion, Princess Patricia's Canadian Light Infantry Mortar Platoon, second in command, you were instrumental in helping your fellow Patricias turn the tide of a relentless Chinese attacks at the Battle of Kapyong. And to think you did this as a young, wet-behind-the-ears 22-year-old lieutenant, under such difficult, dangerous, and demanding conditions on Hill 677 in some far-off land. We know that Charlie, Randy, Chris, and Tim, as well as your 11 grandchildren, will be so proud of their father and grandfather tonight. We are extremely proud that Valour Canada has acknowledged your contributions to our regiment, the Army, and to our nation. You truly are a monumental Canadian, and on behalf of Patricia's, our sincerest congratulations and thanks for what you have done. We are looking forward to seeing you at our 100th anniversary celebrations in 2014, right across Canada. Best regards, regimentally, Adrian Clarkson, the Right Honourable Colonel-in-Chief, Princess Patricia's Canadian Light Infantry, and Ray Crabb, Lieutenant General retired, Colonel of the Regiment. Now, that was their message. Now I have a quick message of my own. I've got the mic, so I might as well. Hub, it's also my personal professional honor to be here tonight. You and I have spoken many times in the past about our service, and tomorrow we will hear in Flanders Fields, to the young we throw the torch. I can honestly say, I just hope with pride that you think we have done you proud when that torch was thrown.
Thank you. Nice job. Thank you, Major Lenny. Our next speaker is Joan Crockett, who was elected as the Member of Parliament for Calgary Centre in 2012. She currently sits on the Committee on the Status of Women, National Defence, and Veterans Affairs, just to name a few. We are pleased that she is able to join us here this evening and make some remarks.
I have to say, I wish I sat on national defense. I sit on natural resources, which is not quite as important to Calgary, but as you are. But thank you very much for that introduction, Bruce. And I have to say, I thought when I first got elected, I went in and I heard the Conservative caucus singing O Canada, and it had to be like one of the most stirring versions of O Canada that I've ever heard. It sounded like the Welsh Men's Choir, and I didn't know that I'd ever hear a more stirring rendition, and I heard one tonight. So thank you all very much. I want to say good evening to Deputy Premier Lukasik, to Minister McIver, to Councillors Keating and Cow, to Major Chris Lunny, representing PPCLI, to Lieutenant Colonel Wickware, to Joey Blevis of the Poppy Fund, to esteemed members of the Canadian Forces, the veterans from age 35 to 85, and particularly HUB and our veterans from the Korean War. So good evening to all of you. Now, someone said they were going to give me an applause if I got all that right. I think I got it. Anybody I missed? And I'm here, of course, on behalf of the Prime Minister of Canada, Stephen Harper. And you know that every day Stephen Harper stands in full respect and honor of everything that you do, and reminds us constantly in the Conservative caucus that we appreciate and admire and are filled with gratitude for everything that you do for Canada. We recognize that achievement, and we commit to be here for you in every way that we can. So particularly to the veterans of the Korean War, on behalf of the Prime Minister, I want to say that I'm delighted to be here for this inaugural event, the Flame of Remembrance ceremony, and I'd also like to thank Valour Canada and the Calgary Tower, who played a very vital role in all of us being here tonight. And I can say with confidence that the Canadian government is committed to being here for you, and particularly for our young veterans. We're working very hard to be able to continue to give you opportunities, both to continue to serve in the armed forces, in the Canadian Forces, if that's what you wish to do, but also to transition out. And it's a subject that we deal with in committee a lot. We've got the Helmets to Hard Hats program. We're working on this transition program to be able to give you full opportunities, first opportunity at federal government jobs, and those kinds of priorities are our priorities. So we want to continue to hear from you, and I can tell you that our government will be responsive. Finally, I'm proud to mention that we are happy that 2013 has been designated the Year of the Korean War Veteran. I'm asking all Canadians to join our government this year in proudly remembering these heroes of the Korean War. In addition, a new Canadian monument in the Republic of Korea was recently unveiled, dedicated to Canadian Armed Forces personnel who fought during that war. So these are just a few ways that our government is recognizing the efforts and the determination of Canada's Korean War vets. So on behalf of the government and all Canadians, thank you very much. Thank you very much to our brave men and women in uniform who are working to uphold freedom and democracy.
Thank you, Joan. On behalf of Valour Canada, I would like to present you with a copy of the PPCLI's 100th anniversary book. So take and enjoy. You betcha. The Honourable Thomas Lukasik is serving his fourth term, as I understand it, in the Alberta Legislature. He is currently the Deputy Premier, Minister of Advanced Education, and Ministerial Liaison to the Canadian Forces. Please welcome the Honourable Thomas Lukasik.
Well, thank you. Good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure and an honor over here.
I kind of like your price and shirts there, too.
Oh, not bad, huh? Pretty good. Our wives are doing a good job. It's an honor and a pleasure to be over here with your MLA, Rick McIver, and Wayne Cow. And I will ask Rick to join me because I know he wants to say a couple of words on behalf of your Calgary caucus, but most importantly to be here on behalf of our Premier, Alison Redford, who is currently in Edmonton because she will be serving at University of Alberta's Butterdome in a big Remembrance Day celebration tomorrow in the morning. What you are doing is simply phenomenal, and it's such an honor for us to be invited to your first inaugural lighting of the flame. And as you will be lighting up the Alberta sky in Calgary with the flame, it will cause us to remember not only what PPCLI has been doing for 100 years, defending our values, defending freedom, and standing up for what truly is Canadian, but also what has happened on many different fronts. And it is really honorable that our Prime Minister and Veterans Affairs have chosen 2013 as the year to remember the Korean conflict, because often it is the forgotten conflict, and no conflict should ever be forgotten. Over 500 Canadians have lost their lives over there. Over 1,600 Canadians suffered casualties, and their lives have been changed forever. And if not for the effort in Korea, world would look much differently today. But also next year, 2014, is a very important year for all of us. 75th anniversary of World War II. And as we know, if not for Canadian soldiers and Allied soldiers, world would look different, much different today. 100th anniversary of World War I, again, where PPCLI and other Canadian regiments played a pivotal role. We have a lot to remember, a lot to be thankful for, and we know that we will always remember them. So I will ask Rick to join me, if that's okay, and pass.
Unfortunately, it's only a book for one, Rick.
Well, we'll share. We'll share the book.
I've known Rick for a long time. Come up here.
And thank you for having us over here, Rick. You don't get a book.
No, thank you, Deputy. The Deputy just wanted a voice from somebody up from the Calgary caucus, and all I'll say is that our Premier and our government understand the only reason we get to practice democracy is because it was provided by men and women in uniform. And for those men and women in uniform here, those that served today and those that served in the past, God bless you. Thank you.
Tom, if you could just come up, please. And again, this is a copy of the 100th anniversary book. Thank you. Thank you. Deputy Mayor is serving his third term on City Council representing Ward 12 and was recently sworn as the Deputy Mayor. So please welcome Deputy Shane Keating.
We all know who didn't vote for me. So. But on behalf of Mayor Nenshi and all the council members, I bring greetings. And tonight is a special occasion because we're lighting a symbol. That was determination and courage back in the 80s, when we first went through the Olympics and things like that. And we are all wearing a symbol. And it represents the individuals behind the symbol, because the poppy is that, just a symbol. But when we look at the individuals who were there. And so as we go forward and we say, how is it that a son, a daughter, a sister, a brother, a nephew, niece, or a parent can give his or her life for a cause that they believe in, and we, their families, are left living with the grief of a death? And yet we still support their choice, and we are extremely proud of them all. The sacrifice made is difficult for the families of the fallen. We have lost them for our embrace forever. It is sometimes difficult to comprehend the motivation, the unselfishness that is stronger than the fear, which allowed these soldiers to put themselves in harm's way to protect the lives of people they have never met. It is even more difficult to imagine a cause so important that a soldier will leave children, spouses, parents, and siblings, and all their extended family, travel thousands of miles overseas and risk their life. But it is also important as the families of those soldiers to understand that they were willing, they went bravely, and they went with the absolute assurance that what they were doing was the right thing to do. We must never forget, and we must remember, that they knew what they were doing, and they were proud of it. Corporal Shane Keating, in explaining to his mother why he wanted to go, summed up bravely the courage and the dedication of these soldiers when he said, "You must look at the bigger picture. Most of us will come home, Mom, and those who don't will have made a difference, lest we forget."
Thank you very much. And if you could come up, Shane. And again, on behalf of Valour Canada, thank you so much. Whoops. All right. At this time, it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. David Burkeson, who, as most of us know, is one of Canada's foremost historians and has written extensively on the Korean War and the Princess Patricias, which is actually kind of near and dear to me because my grandfather was a Pat. Professor Burkeson is currently the director of the Center for Military and Strategic Studies at the University of Calgary. We are pleased to have him speak to us tonight on Canada's role in the Korean War and the heroic stand of the 2nd Battalion PPCLI at Kapyong in April of 1951. Please welcome Dr. Burkeson.
Thank you very much. When Tom Leppard first invited me to attend this evening, he forgot to mention the venue. My family knows that I rarely venture above the 2nd floor in any building. And to have my back turned to what seems to me from here to be about a 10,000-foot drop to the pavement, well, I'm doing it because I could remember what it felt like that day in March of 2008 when I was privileged to join a convoy from Kandahar Airfield to go out to the Panjwai-Zari district in Afghanistan, and I felt much the same trepidation that I feel right now. As Deputy Premier Lukasik said, the Korean War has often been known as the Forgotten War or Canada's Forgotten War. And I think it's easy enough for us to understand why that is the case, because in June of 1950, when the communist North Korea attacked South Korea in a bid to reunite the peninsula by force, most of Canada was involved in the business of getting back to normal life. After all, it had been only 5 years since the end of the Second World War, and 1.1 million Canadians, men and women, were trying to reintegrate themselves back into society and raise families, buy houses in the suburbs, buy their washing machines and their first TV sets, as my family did, and really very few of them had the presence at that time to think about Korea or about going to Korea or about what Korea would mean. And I really want to talk about Kapyong tonight, give you a little description of what actually happened there. So I don't want to go into this in too great a detail, but one only needs to look today at the Korean Peninsula and see a North Korea that is a dark and foreboding land where people starve to death, where essentially a political mafia controls the government, where the funds that are available go for the production of nuclear weapons, but for food, modern education, modern communications, and so on, there isn't anything. And south of what was the 38th parallel, and what was at the time, at the end of the Korean War in July 1953, the ceasefire line, which the Allied troops called the Jamestown Line, south of there is a thriving democracy as modern as any on the face of the earth, a democracy and an advanced industrial society where people can aspire to all of the wonderful things in life that we do in this country. And all you need to know is to know that, and you know that Hub and the other 26,000 Canadians who served in Korea made one hell of a difference. Now, on August 7th, 1950, Prime Minister Louis Saint-Laurent succumbed to pressure both internal and external to send ground troops to Korea by announcing that Canada would send a brigade group. It was a major challenge to those men to get those men signed, trained, and sent to Korea as quickly as possible. The government decided to seek volunteers, especially veterans of the Second World War, and place them in second battalions of existing regiments. They would initially be trained by the 1st Battalions and led by a combination of returning officers and senior NCOs with Second World War experience or transferred from regular force units. They would be armed with British pattern equipment with which they would be familiar and trained using Second World War training manuals and procedures. Recruitment began early on the morning of August 8th, and to ensure quick mobilization, normal medical and other exams were truncated and attestation processes were cut short. John Meredith Rockingham, who had commanded the 9th Canadian Infantry Brigade at the end of the Second World War, was enticed out of civilian life to take command of the brigade group. Initial training would take place at the different regimental headquarters across the country because winter was fast approaching. Final unit training would be held at Fort Lewis, Washington, where the weather would be marginally better than on the Canadian prairie. The brigade group would consist of 3 infantry battalions, 1 field artillery regiment, a field ambulance, an infantry workshop, a transport company, and other formations. A tank squadron, an anti-tank unit, and other formations were eventually added for a total strength of 4,960 all ranks and a reinforcement group of 2,105. As it turned out, the reinforcements would be sorely needed because in the haste to create the formation, many men who were unfit due to age, physical conditioning, psychological profile, or even physical handicaps had been inducted, and hundreds would have to be replaced over the next 6 to 8 months. Rockingham's initial team were all Second World War battalion commanders. Jacques Dextraz had led the Fusiliers Mont-Royal, and he agreed to command the 2nd Battalion of the Royal 22nd Regiment, the Vendus. Jim Stone had led the Loyal Edmonton Regiment and would command 2 PPCLI. Robert A. Keane, who had commanded Lake Superior Regiment, would take the 2nd Battalion of the Royal Canadian Regiment. Much of the British pattern kit the brigade would use was either outmoded or would prove useless in the Korean theater. So many U.S. weapons and radios were issued during training, including bazooka anti-tank rockets, 75mm recoilless rifles, and more powerful radios. Unfortunately, the personal kit issued to the men from their Lee Enfield rifles, Sten submachine guns, tin hat helmets, and even cold weather gear proved completely inadequate in Korea. After the Special Force units began to recruit, train, and equip across Canada, they headed by train to Fort Lewis for more advanced training. But the Incheon landing in September of 1950 suddenly raised doubts as to whether or not the Canadians were even required there after all, because it seemed that General MacArthur's masterstroke had ended the Korean War quickly. Ottawa consulted Washington to determine if the Canadians were still needed and was told to send 1 battalion for general occupation duty. The 2nd Battalion of the PPCLI, under command of Jim Stone, was readier than the other units. And on November the 25th, 1950, the battalion set out for Korea aboard the U.S. transport ship Private Joseph P. Martinez. The situation on the ground in Korea changed almost as soon as the battalion sailed, when the Chinese launched an all-out attack all along the UN front on the on Thanksgiving Day, 1950, U.S. Thanksgiving Day. The Chinese counterattack set off a UN rout. When the Patricias landed at Pusan on December 18th, Stone was told by the Americans that he was to get his forces to the front and join a British brigade as soon as possible. But he knew his men weren't ready to fight, and he resisted the order. He was legally able to do so because he was armed with Canadian government authority to refuse any order which, in his view, might jeopardize the existence of his formation. So on December 27th, instead of going into the line, the Patricias left Pusan for Miryang, where they were to train and re-equip for the next 6 weeks before joining the UN forces at the front. Stone oversaw tough physical training and weeded out men who were not mentally or physically ready for war. At the same time, the men were familiarized with new U.S. pattern equipment. The men were also taught lessons that the American and other UN troops had learned about fighting the Chinese. All the while, unit training was stepped up. On 15 February, the battalion left Miryang and set out to join the 27th British Commonwealth Brigade at the front. The Patricias reached the brigade in time to join another in a series of pushes aimed at pressing the Chinese back across the 38th parallel. They moved north in a heavy snowfall, trudging up to a ridge line on the eastern side of a broad valley. They encountered no opposition because the Chinese had broken contact with the advancing forces. When the Patricias reached the top of Hill 404, they came upon the frozen corpses of more than 60 American soldiers laid out by a graves registration party. The Americans had been caught in their sleeping bags at night and machine gunned. Stone ordered all sleeping bags sent back from the front. As the icy grip of the Korean winter began to give way to early spring, UN forces continued their slow but steady push north. the Patricias were sorely tested by the mountain fighting, the ambushes, and the Chinese hit-and-run attacks. On March 7th, for example, the Patricias were part of a brigade attack aimed at capturing Hill 532, with A and D companies leading the battalion advance. The slopes were steep and overgrown with thick brush, and the Chinese were well dug in. The Patricias soon found themselves spread out over the forward slope, being picked off by the Chinese, almost all of whom used submachine guns of one variety or another. With only one Bren gun per section, they were pinned down by Chinese machine gun and mortar fire, and both A and D companies tried to advance, but to no avail. Stone had to pull them back off the hill. 7 Patricias were killed that day. The Chinese then broke contact and withdrew to the north. On the night of 21st, 27th April, 1951, the 27th British Commonwealth Infantry Brigade was in reserve in a Y-shaped valley near the village of Kapyong when a major Chinese attack smashed through a South Korean division about 10 kilometers to the north and broke the UN lines. The brigade commander, Colonel B.A. Burke, knew that the Chinese advance would soon smash into his brigade. He ordered his 3rd Battalion, the 3rd Battalion of the Royal Australian Rifles, backed by a company of the United States 72nd Tank Battalion, to dig in on Hill 504 on the east side of the Kapyong Valley, on the east side of the Y. He positioned Stone's Patricias on Hill 677 on the other side of the valley, about 5 kilometers from the Australians. Burke also assigned a company each of the U.S. 2nd Chemical Heavy Mortar Battalion with 12 4.2-inch mortars to the Australians and Stone's Patricias. In addition, he had at his disposal 1 battery of U.S. 105 self-propelled guns and some medium artillery. When Stone received Burke's order to concentrate his battalion on Hill 677, he organized a complete reconnaissance of possible Chinese attack approaches, then assigned defensive positions to his company commanders in a rough semicircle. Just after midnight on April 24th, the Chinese hit the Australians first. Blowing whistles and bugles, the Chinese infantry rose out of the dark and rushed the RAR slit trenches behind a shower of mortar rounds. Close behind the first line of attackers came a second, hurling hundreds of grenades and carrying explosives to breach the Australian wire. The Australian CO called for defensive fire before losing radio contact with the brigade. Daylight brought no respite for the Australian defenders. By mid-afternoon, it was clear to Burke that they could not hold out another night, and he ordered them to withdraw. At 5:30 p.m., the Australians, accompanied by the American tanks, began to pull back. They had suffered 31 killed, 58 wounded, and had lost 3 men prisoner. And now it was the Patricia's turn. Stone had closely observed the battle across the valley, and by morning had decided that an attack on his position would most likely come from his eastern slope. He strengthened his defenses there. At 8:30 p.m., just as the Australian withdrawal was being completed, about 400 Chinese infantry were observed forming up in a valley near the Patricia's B Company. Company commander Major C.V. Lilly called for artillery and mortar concentrations, but the Chinese attacked en masse. The forward Patricia platoon, commanded by Lieutenant H. Ross, battled them off as long as it could, but was soon partially overrun and forced to pull back into the B Company area. The other platoons of B Company were less beleaguered and held their ground. The fighting at close quarters was deadly. As B Company came under attack, a small group of Chinese tried to get inside the battalion area by infiltrating up the valley behind Stone's tactical headquarters. The Chinese were silhouetted against the Kapyong River as they approached, and Lieutenant Hub Gray was in charge of 12 half-tracks equipped with 150 and 130 caliber machine gun on each one. Their concentrated fire stopped the Chinese cold. As the night wore on, the Patricias held to their positions, but their situation became increasingly desperate. Heavy fighting continued to swell around B Company. At 1:30 a.m., D Company's 10 platoon on the western tip of the hill became the focal point for another heavy Chinese attack. Despite the artillery and mortar fire pouring down around their positions to keep them safe, about 200 Chinese came at them from the west. Platoon Commander Lieutenant Mike Levy reported to Acting Company Commander Captain J.G.W. Mills that his men were engaged on 3 sides. Levy called for close-in fire support from the mortars and the field artillery, while making sure his own men were below ground in their slit trenches and gun pits. The shrapnel burst set to explode just below Treetop sent clouds of hot, jagged, and twisted metal into the Chinese attackers. Below ground, the Canadians were protected. That broke the back of the Chinese attack. In the words of one American chronicler of the Korean War, the holding action of the Commonwealth Brigade at Kapyong had been decisive. It plugged the hole left by the ROK 6th Division and blocked the Chinese long enough for the 24th U.S. Infantry Division to withdraw. The reprise gave the 8th Army Commander, James Van Fleet, time to set up a new defensive line running just to the north of Seoul, withdraw his units to that line in good order, save the capital, and prepare for a massive counterattack back to the 38th parallel. For his solid leadership and imaginative planning, Stone received a bar to his Distinguished Service Order. For the crucial 48 hours they brought to you in Kapyong, the 2nd Battalion PPCLI, the 3rd Battalion of the Royal Australian Regiment, and the U.S. 72nd Tank Battalion were awarded a U.S. Presidential Unit Citation. And to this day, the PPCLI are the only regiment in Canadian history to be so honored.
At this time, I'd like to call on Bob Miller, who is a retired Brigadier General and past Chair of Valour Canada, to please come forward and give thanks on our behalf to Dr. Burkeson. Bob? Sorry? Oh, I'm sorry. All right, well. Sorry, Lee, he gave me the wrong notes. Anyway.
God, I was looking forward to this. Anyway, I'm Lee Richardson, and I want to say, Bruce, and to all of you here, what a great honor it is for me to thank Dr. Burkeson for his remarks. And I got to tell you, because I was asked to do this, I hope you have a copy of your notes, and David, you'll give me a copy of your notes, because thinking of having to thank you, I really didn't pay a whole lot of attention to what you were saying. and that won't come as a surprise to him, because David has been a friend and mentor for, I'm not going to say how long, buddy. Along with Tom Leopard, wherever Tom is here, we were in a graduate class with Dr. David Burkeson at the University of Calgary quite a few years ago. And I think, like so many in this room, I want to thank David, not just for his remarks tonight, but for the inspiration he has been to so many of us, to people like me, David, and to Tom Leopard, and to, well, just a lot of people in this room, to appreciate those that came before us and those that serve us today. And for you who have recorded in over 35 books, I think it is by now, but also the students like me in graduate school at University of Calgary, that you gave us that inspiration. I'm going to Brad over there, and I don't know where he got it from. But those kind of people, the people in this room, that it just seems like we keep bumping into each other, that have that feel. And David, you're a big part of that. And thank you so much for that, and also for your remarks tonight. And Bruce, thanks for everybody. Now, would you come up here, and I get to present this on behalf of everybody here, as well as Valour Canada, for doing that.
Appreciate that.
Thank you.
Sorry for this snafu, old boy. Now, if my notes are correct, if I'm understanding this correctly, it's now my opportunity to introduce Jean Merriman, who is the Vice Chair of Valour Canada, a well-known Calgary TV and movie producer. And she will introduce the video tribute entitled Battle of Kapyong. Jean?
Thank you, Justice MacDonald. It's my honor to introduce the latest addition to Valour Canada's award-winning video series, Monumental Canadians, the Battle of Capion. Patricia's heroic stand at Capion is a story that needs to be told. And tonight we will introduce you and premiere this video for the first time. On behalf of Valour Canada, we would like to thank Captain Hub Gray for providing us with absolutely riveting eyewitness accounts of the battle. And thank you, Hub, for being so giving and generous with your time. Thank you. On a personal note, I grew up under the thumb of 2 regimental sergeant majors, both Patricias, my father and my grandfather, who fought with the Patricias in the Korean War. I'm very proud to have grown up in the PPCLI family. Valour Canada wishes to thank the Princess Patricias for their support of the video and the inaugural Flame of Remembrance ceremony. We would especially like to thank Joey Blevis of the Calgary Poppy Fund and Veterans Affairs Canada for their generous support, which made the video possible. And we would also like to thank the Calgary Military Museum, curator Rory Corey, who I believe is here tonight, for allowing us to film in the Korean War exhibit. Ladies and gentlemen, we will now view the Battle of Capion.
April 23, 1951, the Kapyong River Valley, Korea. Perched atop Hill 677, the 700 soldiers of the 2nd Battalion Princess Patricia's Canadian Light Infantry anxiously watched the army of their South Korean allies retreating below their position, pursued by 20,000 Chinese. 22-year-old Lieutenant Hub Gray was there.
Well, we had been in the line for 30 days, and we came out for a rest. And then suddenly we were warned that we had to move to the front. However, the thrust of the Chinese was much faster than anyone had anticipated. They advanced 40 kilometers in about 36 hours.
3 kilometers across the valley on Hill 504 is the 3rd Battalion Royal Australian Regiment. It would be up to the Canadians and Australians to stop the Chinese juggernaut. Significantly outnumbered, the Battle of Kapyong is about to begin. It would be a small battle with monumental consequences. Korea was the Cold War's first hot conflict. Partitioned after the Second World War at the 38th parallel, the Soviet Union controlled the North and the United States the South. Armed, trained, and prodded by the Soviets, the North invaded the South on June 25, 1950. The South Korean army was overwhelmed and retreated headlong to Busan. The UN Security Council authorized military intervention. In September, the Incheon landings turned the tide. Seoul was recaptured, and legendary U.S. General Douglas MacArthur ordered UN forces to invade the North. In early December, the Chinese intervened and drove the UN forces back across the 38th. Over 25,000 Canadian volunteers fought in Korea, the UN's 3rd largest contingent. 516 would never come home. In early 1951, the 2nd Battalion Princess Patricia's Canadian Light Infantry, the PPCLI, landed at Busan. Once again for Canada, they were the first in the field. The ranks were filled with Second World War veterans, notably its rugged commanding officer, Lieutenant Colonel Jim Stone.
Jim Stone was a fearless individual. When he would come to visit us in the front lines, he would walk on the crest to demonstrate to the troops that he wasn't afraid of the enemy. He was, in my view, a brilliant tactician.
By late April, the PPCLI, or Patricias, were in reserve south of Kapyong. On April 22nd, the Chinese launched a major attack and broke through the UN line north of Kapyong. The Australians and Canadians rushed forward to plug the gap and occupied 2 hills that dominated the narrow entrance to the Kapyong River Valley. If they broke, the road to Seoul would be open. The Aussies were hit first and fought stubbornly. After 24 hours, they were running low on ammunition and withdrew, leaving behind 32 killed and carrying their 59 wounded.
Earlier in the evening, the Australians, they were withdrawing across the river in fighting their withdrawing battle. And company commander asked us to fire on the enemy. We opened fire with our machine guns. We saw the Chinese, remember, we're 3 km apart. They looked like ants crossing the river.
Now it was up to the 700 soldiers of the Patricias, divided into 4 rifle companies. Stone had positioned his soldiers skillfully around the crest of Hill 677. B Company was hit first at 10:50 p.m. The fighting was hand-to-hand, but the Canadians held.
So when they attacked, they would first of all yell like banshees, trying to frighten us. And when they were 100 meters away, it really woke you up, believe me. They would mass their troops on a very small front. They would send in a row of men, 30 to 50 across, 30 meters behind another row, and seemingly unending masses in that way. They all carried a light machine gun. We, on the other hand, had a rifle designed in 1914, single shot, bolt action, Lee Enfield.
Several hundred Chinese silently infiltrated the Canadian lines. Luckily, Lieutenant Gray saw them coming.
All our companies were in the front of a slope. We were behind a reverse side of the slope, which would have been about 50 meters or 60 meters high. Unbeknown to us, the Chinese sent about 500 men around behind, and they advanced. I happened to notice, as did some of the troops I was with, them coming up the hill as they neared the crest. They didn't make a sound. We could hear nothing. I was detached from the action of the firing of the mortars with 4 half-tracks. Each half-track has 2 machine guns, one 30 caliber and one 50 caliber. As they were approaching the crest, and they were at right angles to us, about 60 yards in front of me, we opened an enfilading fire. As one of my men said, "My God, it looks like somebody took off the top of an anthill." They were scattering.
D Company was attacked next. The 24 men of Lieutenant Mike Levy's 10th Platoon met the waves of Chinese soldiers with bayonets, Bren guns, and grenades. But the Chinese kept coming.
We were very under strength. An infantry platoon in those days had a complement of about 42. Mike Levy's platoon at Dog Company, where he got the intensity of the Chinese attack, was 24.
Around 3 a.m., with the Chinese overrunning his position, Levy radioed "Danger close," signaling the artillery to fire on his position.
The Chinese were within 7 meters of Mike's position in masses, that he ordered his men to hunker down, and he brought the fire twice, these barrages on his own troops.
The deadly barrages lasted 40 minutes, and thousands of rounds rained down. By sunup, the Chinese attacks stopped. Miraculously, Levy's platoon suffered no casualties from the bombardment.
The artillery support is what saved our bacon. I believe that Mike Levy was probably responsible for saving my life.
Running low on food and ammo, an airdrop resupplied the Patricias, but the Chinese were gone. The PPCLI had held. The Battle of Cap Yong was over. Incredibly, the Patricias' losses were 10 killed and 23 wounded. Chinese casualties were estimated at over 1,000. It was the last major Chinese offensive of the war, a war that dragged on until 1953. U.S. President Harry Truman awarded the Patricias a Presidential Unit Citation for Cap Yong, the first Canadian unit to be so honored. But what is the battle's legacy to the Patricias who were there?
I keep fighting the war. I keep thinking about my dead comrades and those of us who are left. It's something that I just can't get rid of. I very often think of it as the enemy's vengeance. You never know exactly when it's going to arrive or when it comes, but it's always there, and you almost never discuss it with your own family. So it's a burden you carry silently within.
We honor those who survived and remember those who made the ultimate sacrifice in Korea, the land of the morning calm. They are truly monumental Canadians.
Wow, a very powerful presentation. It really is, and first rate. Anyway, at this point, I'd like to call upon our esteemed chair, our Chief Poobah, Tom Leppard.
Thank you very much. Colonel John McCrae was a soldier, a doctor, and a poet. In May of 1915, he was operating on wounded Canadian and British soldiers at a forward field hospital in the Ypres salient at a place called Essex Farm. And his operating theater is still there, and I'm sure many of you have visited the dungy little place where he was saving lives. The battle was intense, and after operating for 5 sleepless nights, McCrae emerged. Sitting down near his hospital, he witnessed the growing number of crosses in the cemetery right beside, and of course the poppies growing between the crosses. McCrae was a poet. He picked up a pencil, picked up his paper, and in a few minutes, etched those immortal words of that famous poem. The poem's crescendo comes in the last stanza. To you from failing hands we throw the torch. Be yours to hold it high. If ye break faith with us who die, we shall not sleep. In a few moments, we will light the tower's torch. The tower's flame is a beacon of our remembrance. We will hold the torch high. I think John McCrae would approve. On the back of your program are the words to Flanders Fields. And we would like everyone now to join in the recitation of that poem. And then we're going to call upon Hub to come and light the torch. Ladies and gentlemen, join with me. In Flanders Fields, the poppies blow, between the crosses, row and row, that mark our place, and in the sky, the larks still bravely singing fly, scarce heard amid the guns below. We are the dead. Short days ago we lived, felt on, saw sunset glow, loved and were loved, and now we lie in Flanders Fields. Take up our quarrel with the foe. To you from failing hands we throw the torch. Be yours to hold it high. If ye break faith with us who die, we shall not sleep, though poppies grow in Flanders Fields.
Now, Hub, if I could ask you to come up here, and I'm not quite sure how the technology is going to work here, but I'm assured by Tom Leppard that it's going to be great. So if you could just come around here, and you just give the command to light the flame.
Oh, dear.
That should be easy.
Well, on behalf of all the veterans, we light the flame. Thank you.
Now, the flame, of course, is above us, and we can't see it here, but you can on the monitor. So there you have it. Yeah, very impressive. I would now ask you all to stand quietly, those of you who can, and remember the fallen during the Piper's Lament. Thank you. Please be seated. I would like at this time to call upon Mr. Philip Fisher, who wants to make a few remarks.
My name is Philip Fisher. I'm president of the Calgary branch of the PPCLI Association. Korea is called the Forgotten War. It is not forgotten in Korea. Last year, Tom Rockburn, one of our members, age 90, went back to Korea and was given a hero's welcome. The people of Korea really understand the difference between the South and the North. They have Canada in a very high regard and Korean veterans in an even higher regard, if that's possible. They are much like the Dutch, who remembered that Canada was the country that gave them their freedom. Thank you, and remember.
Thank you. I'd like now to call Mr. Brad Pierce, who is the chair of Valour Canada.
Thank you. I've got the easy role. I'm here to thank you all for coming and want to remind you all tomorrow to try and make it out to one of the remembrance ceremonies honoring our vets. I want to thank HUB tremendously for allowing us to profile you. I want to thank our dignitaries, the messages from our politicians. Thank you so much. But thank you mostly to the men and women in service that are here today and the veterans that are here today. We are here to honor you. It's what we do at Valour Canada. We're trying to do it in a different way that's been done before. I hope you agree with what we're doing. If you don't, please tell us. We are going to continue with this innovative programming, trying to reach Canadians at all levels. New Canadians, young Canadians, techno-savvy Canadians, not so techno-savvy Canadians, and hope you will support us. In any event, thank you again so much for coming. I think we have God Save the Queen yet for the closing, and thank you to you for singing.
Bravo. Okay, just before we finish, please have a seat, those that have seats. Not to rub it in, but I'm having trouble with this level of technology anyway. Before we call it an end for the evening, I would like to make acknowledgments and thanks to a number of our individuals. First of all, the Dr. J.K. Malloy Choir and their director, Lisa Armstrong. They are absolutely outstanding. Also, I'd like to acknowledge our piper, courtesy the Calgary Highlanders, Piper Alf Miller. I'd also like to acknowledge the hardworking staff of Valour Canada, Leah Johnson, Max Lapthorne, and Tim Choi. Aaron Beattie, the manager of the Calgary Tower. The staff of Sky 360. And finally, and most importantly, we would like to thank Hub Gray. He reminds us of why we are so proud of veterans and serving members of our forces, and affirms the importance of remembering the fallen, and that we will not break faith, but will carry the torch. Thank you very much. And with that, I'd like to invite everyone for coffee and dessert. Thank you again for attending.